Hey friends, I have a confession to make. I hate watering. Yes, I said it out loud and it's very, very true. This is truly the only gardening chore which I really don't like at all, and this is the reason why I had from year 2 of my gardening experience already an irrigation system installed. So today I want to show you what I did there in terms of irrigation. I learned a few lessons along the way which I want to share with you, but we'll talk about how to start with an irrigation system, how to make it really easy and really flexible for all of your needs. As you know, I have a vegetable garden, but also I have a large cut flower strip where different areas need different watering requirements. So we go through how you can set that up to have maximum flexibility as well. And yeah, I'll just walk you through how I started, what I thought through, the things to consider to get started, and really, yeah, hopefully give you here a guide to start your own irrigation system afterwards. So let's get started. So let's talk a little bit about the why I love my irrigation system and what are the big benefits of having an irrigation system. So one of the main reasons why I do it, it's so much more efficient in terms of watering. So for example, you've probably heard it from other resources, like watering overhead is not good for the plants because it can distribute diseases and problems, like you can splatter like pests around, or really like fungal diseases, for example. If the leaves stay damp, it's just a breeding ground for problems. So even if you hand water, you always want to water at the base of the plant and never from the top. But what the irrigation system is, basically it's always watering from the very bottom. And what it does and why it's so efficient is it is slow dripping water into the ground, because if you water, for example, with a watering wand by hand or so, the chances that the water is running off and not really going into the soil is rather high. So for that reason, the slow drip irrigation is really something where you can just receive more hydration and saturation for your soil with less water. So for that reason, it is a lot more efficient and it saves you money in the end because you use less water but a lot more efficiently. And then, of course, my laziness factor, as you've heard it already in other videos, I'm a lazy person. So to be able to not water and be able really to save that time and have it just on auto run for most of the season is really something what I personally enjoy and can just recommend for other people. So let's talk a little bit about where is my water actually coming from. At the house, under the deck, so excuse the deck, it's messy underneath there, it's just real life, but this is where we have the faucet. So it's pretty far away. So it comes around the entire fence line here and then basically takes a curve and then goes along the fence line here at the garden. So pretty much along the entire fence line over here, and then a little bit in the corner over there where Maggie is laying, because I have a hibiscus which needs a lot of water in that corner as well, which is hooked up to water as well. But this is where the main line runs. So from the faucet, from the house, alongside the entire fence line over here, with a 3/4 inch supply line, which is the second to largest supply line you can get to really get your water distributed to where you need it. And then what you can also see here is that we have here little chutes into the garden, right? So little intersections, which then lead to each and every bed. And I have these days underground the lines which go to the Vigo beds and also to the cut flower beds. I'll trench that last year to really have good water supply over there. What you might have noticed is as well that every one of my beds has also a shut-off valve. That is designed on purpose because I do not have every bed in use all the time in the year, right? So I don't want to waste water irrigating a bed which doesn't need the extra moisture. So it's really, really helpful to think about in your layout and in your concept, what are those areas you might need to shut off in like spring or fall, like in those shoulder seasons where you might not need to irrigate everything. And this is really important to conceptualize for an irrigation system as well. So for each one of my large vegetable beds and also for the larger Vigo beds, how I did it, like I have that valve coming up, leading into the bed itself. And then I have a supply line at the short end of the bed where I then plug in my 1/4-inch drip line. So I have here for an 8x4 bed 5 lines with a 6-inch drip line, which we'll talk as well about, to really have enough water, because I plant quite densely, so they really need a lot of water. So that is the reason why I use the 6-inch drip line, but then also have like 5 lines to really make sure that everything in those beds gets the water it needs. And that has been very, very a great setup for all of the beds. I have it now in all beds. I start a little bit wonky with like having one going through, but one thing which you need to consider and to think about with those drip lines is how long you can run them. In a 4x8 bed, if you would just run it with like one long line, you come up to a good size or a good length of drip line already, and they don't run that long. So you risk that at the end of the line, the water doesn't come out as significantly as in the beginning of the line, right? So that's just something to consider. With having smaller, shorter drip lines coming off a larger supply line, you don't run into the risk that water doesn't make it to the end. So sounds more complicated than it is. If you have an option to go shorter, go shorter. That's always better for the water. For my smaller Vigo bed, this is like a 6.5 by, I think that is 2.5 inches deep. I didn't fuss around with the supply line and then the lines going off from them. I have just one longer line looped into here once around, and that is totally sufficient for those smaller beds. So think about the beds you have and the space you have to run. Measuring helps as well to just take the guesswork out of it, to just know how long a line might be throughout the bed, and then you can make an educated decision here. A setup we're particularly proud of is my cut flower strips, because as you can see, they are quite large and long, but also I want to have the flexibility in those cut flower beds to plant whatever I want, and different flowers have different watering needs. So to be able to flexible, really decide in an area how much water you provide in a certain area versus not, was something what was important to me. So for this reason, I have a quite interesting setup here in those beds. And what I did is, again, like this is 3 feet wide, so I have 3 main 1/2-inch supply lines through the entire bed, spaced out equally. And what I then have, every foot I have a flexible emitter punched into the supply line. So you can get little emitters, which you then punch a hole in the supply line and put those ones in, and they are adjustable. So you can decide between, I think it was 1/2 gallon to 2.5 gallon of water you can give this area as supply. So you basically screw them a little bit more open to provide more water, and screw them shut to reduce the water flow. And this has been amazing. So for example, my spring garden, which soon needs water and will probably turn the water on in like 3 to 4 weeks when we're out of the deep frost zone, then I can just turn on the area and open the valves for the spring area, versus everything else is still shut off and not in use. So this is really one reason why I love the irrigation system so well. I can point where I want to water, and I can really make sure that only the areas are watered which need the water, and the water is just distributed so much more efficiently than I would hand water in any shape or form. So yep, that is a system I'm very proud of and it works perfectly fine. So that is something what you need to consider when you think about your irrigation system. What is the distance from the faucet to where you need the water? Because that in the end will dictate what kind of supply line you need. The further the distance from the faucet, the larger supply line you need to really be able to carry the amount of water you need with the right water pressure to the garden. So to just give you an idea over here, so the typical diameters of supply lines are from the smallest to the largest, which you get is typically a 1/4 inch, which I use in my beds as the drip line for really the last mile or the last inches to get to the actual plant. And then what I typically use here as like main lines is either in 1/2 inch or a 3/4 inch, or if you really want to go bigger, it is in inch diameter lines. So, and those are large ones. So for my garden here, I choose the 3/4 inch line, which is like the second to largest line, because I have a lot of distance here to make and a lot of lines running off it. So I really want to make sure that I have water pressure throughout the system. And for that, this can run in total 480 feet wide in a distance. So this is not just straight distance, but also distance of the water supplies you have coming off of it. So that's something you got to consider, how much distance you create with those lines coming off a main line to really make sure that you have the water pressure in the entire line. But from the moment, I think it was the hardest for me to decide on the main line because I was concerned with that distance that I can't keep the water pressure, but I'm glad I chose the 3/4 inch line. That was the right choice after some research for my distance. And yeah, now the system is fully working and just, what I always wanted it to be. After I chose the main line, the rest was basically a little bit like a Lego system to think about. But for this Lego system, you need some parts. So what I do here is, or what I chose as a main system is called Permalock system. So those are basically the connector to the main lines. And let me go with a coupler. This is more simplistic piece. So the coupler is really in case you have like a cut in the line and you need to fix it, this is where you put the coupler in. But you can see here the Permalock system the best way. So what it does is you push the main line here on the top, and then you have this little cap, which is just screw over the line here, and it holds it tight. So this here on the top is basically replacing the clamp and makes it super easy to also adjust if you need to change the system or replace a piece or so. It is not as, you don't need any tools basically to exchange pieces, which I love about that. Pieces are a little bit more expensive, but I think they're worth it because they make the whole setup so much easier. You don't need many more tools except for like really a little bit of muscle to push the pieces on, and it's more flexible. You can easily exchange it if something is broken or for some reason didn't make it through the winter. It's a lot easier to replace than hassling around with clamps, if you ask me. I got to say, I have here a rather small snapshot, right? So to have slightly more expensive pieces for my garden wasn't making such a big difference for me. But if you have a larger garden, do your math and see what makes more sense for you and your needs, of course, right? So what I can also recommend is, and we'll see that with everything, is once you have your irrigation system set up, make sure you have some extra pieces of everything. Like I have some extra elbows, some extra couplers, some extra end pieces for whenever you might want to adjust or adapt your system because you've realized it didn't work the way you envisioned it in the first season or want to make some updates. Couplers are especially important to have on hand after the winter. I'm a little bit concerned when I'm turning my system on again, where I have all some wildlife chewing into the lines. I just replaced in one of my veggie beds the end lines because I don't know what went through it, but I don't know, a bunny, squirrel or whatever, but like 3 of my 1/4 inch lines in this bed were completely chewed up at the end. So for that reason, to really have some couplers for whenever there is like a leak or so to fix it, that is really how you do it. You cut it, put a coupler in, and off you go. So those are really important to have on hand. There is nothing more annoying when you turn on watering the irrigation system again and you have a leak and you can't run it then because you don't have the piece to fix it, right? So don't be cheap on those ones. Have a few extras at hand. And also for those cases when you go with a shovel and accidentally cut a line. Yes, I've done this multiple times in a hectic, or when not when I lifted the dahlias. There I was more careful, but it's so easy with a shovel, and you didn't think of it when you have there a line to just cut it, or at least injure it that water is leaking. So it's really easy to do it. So I said you almost need no tools, but I do recommend to have 2 specific tools, which will make setting up the entire system so much more easy. So for the main lines, so the bigger supply lines like the 3/4 inch and the 1/2 inch line, which I have, I got, I think at Home Depot also, like one of those really nice sharp cutters, right? So careful when you use it, but this one, it's a pipe cutter, I think is the name. This one worked magic. Yes, you can cut it just with some sharp scissors, but what those sharp scissors do is they always will bend the end a little bit, and then it makes it a lot more harder to put this on those Permalock connectors. So to have those ones here at the pipe cutter, it's just, number one, it's sharper and it makes a really, really clean cut. Can highly recommend those. And then when you look at Drip Depot or wherever you go, you have 2 different options to punch holes into a supply line. So, and there's like one hole puncher which looks like you just stab it in. I had that one first. That one was terrible. So this one is a lot easier on your hand if you have to punch a whole lot of holes. So for example, for my cut flower garden, where I have basically those 3 lines, the 3 supply lines running through the bed, I had to punch for every emitter I put into the line a hole. So I don't know how many it was. I think like something like 200 holes or something. That was a lot of holes. So to make this one easier, I can recommend to have the slightly more expensive hole punch. And when I say more expensive, it was like, I think like $4 or $5 more. Your hand will thank you for that. So that is something what I can recommend. What I can also recommend is for all those little pieces, because those are the ones which I really use the most. So for everything what I have in my bed, I use typically those drip lines, and those are the 6-inch emitter drip line. What does it mean is, so you have here every 6 inches emitters in those lines. This is like the most emitters per drip line you can get. But for example, for my vegetable beds, I plant very intensely and very dense. So I really need that coverage in water to make sure that I am able to give my plants what they need. I know there are also, I think a few followers asked me the other day, oh, can I just use drip tape? So what is the difference between drip tape and drip line? So this is basically a very solid poly line, which is really, really sturdy. Like you can't just like press it and it will like close up the line or so. So this is really, really rigid. This is why I prefer this one. What is drip tape? Drip tape is a more flexible, I'm not sure if it's rubber or like kind of a nylon material, but it's very, very, you can roll it up tight, not like this, which is just sort of rolled up, but not really tight. You can really roll it up tight. What is the issue with drip tape is that you need to have it straight. It can only be used straight, and it can't have anything around it, because from the moment you put something or it flips over, water doesn't get through it anymore because it basically blocks it. That is too much hassle for my effort. And as you know, I have a lot of corners and everything around, so I didn't want to hassle with it. And one main difference to drip tape as well is it uses a different water pressure in the system than all the drip lines. So for everything what I have in my garden, this can run within 25 psi, I think. Yeah, exactly. 25 psi water pressure, and all of it can run with it. The drip tape, I think, runs on in 15 psi. So which means is this irrigation line or my irrigation system, the water pressure is too high to use drip tape for it. So for that, I would need to have another pressure reducer to be able to operate it. For my system, everything is a drip line. It's just a matter of how big or how small the drip line is. So everything can run there with a 25 psi water pressure on it, and I don't have to think about it. That makes it just more easy, if you ask me. But if you have like long rows of like a cut flower garden in ground, like flower farmers do, I know they typically use drip tape. It's more efficient in terms of pricing to run it for those distances. And yeah, you just need to think about to have a little pressure regulator from the moment you plug those tapes in from the main line. But there's just one more part to think about it, and then off you go, right? But they can only run straight, and you got to make sure they are stay put without any distraction to operate properly. So with that said, I use everywhere I go my drip lines either with emitters or just the poly lines to go somewhere. And from there, I use emitters. And the flexible emitters are one of my favorite emitters, which I have over here. Those are emitters which are really, really great. They have, this is a 360 emitter, which means it leaves water out or leaks water out like in a little umbrella out of it. So for example, for my grow bag garden, I have a main line between the grow bags, have a little supply line coming up over into the grow bags, and then I have one of those 360 emitters just popped in the middle for my small, like for example, for my potato grow bags, which then umbrellas the water in beautifully. So that works really, really well. For my larger grow bags, for example, I have a slightly other setup. I usually, and that is where the Lego part comes in again, I usually take a piece of my drip line, make it into in circle, and then I have, for example, one piece going in here and put in the middle an emitter as well. So to just for the larger ones to get, again, have coverage, but then also making sure that the middle portion of the grow bag gets some water in as well. And that is kind of the fun of designing your own irrigation system. There is really no limits of like how you want to like work with the pieces here. I have in this little box, you see here all my pieces. There are some elbows. Again, couplers, always have couplers, important. And also always have end caps. You are surprised how often you need them. More like some T's and some like crosses as well. And then I have those inline emitters, which we have in the cut flower garden to just plug into a larger line, or those ones are the end emitters, which fit on the 1/4 inch line as emitters as a gallon per hour drip emitter. I personally always love the flexible ones more because I can control it. So now let's talk the most interesting portion, or the most fun portion, is how to automate the system then. So I have down below here at the faucet in little device which is called Beehive from Orbit, and this connects to an app, and this basically automates my watering because I can set a watering schedule for it. It has also a smart water auto function, but if you get any of those automated watering systems, be careful if you want to use it for a vegetable or a cut flower garden. Most of these systems are designed for lawn watering, which has very, very different watering needs than, for example, in cut flower garden or a vegetable garden. Any of those smart watering programs which came with the device or the app itself weren't really sufficient enough for my watering needs for the vegetable garden, so I eventually turned that off. It also has an option for like watering less when it was raining. That for some reason never worked as well. So I have it set on a schedule, and when I know it's like pouring rain all week, I like quit or cancel a couple waterings for that week. But typically I let it run on autopilot for most days. Don't ask me what the program is. That will be very, very different for you, for your garden needs, for your zone, for your weather. There are so many parameters. For example, in the off seasons like spring or fall, going into fall, I typically let it water just every other day or every 3 days for like half an hour in the morning hours, so typically like from 6 to 6:30 or so. But in the summer I have it, for example, on every day in the morning for 45 minutes to an hour, depending on like how much moisture we are getting through the week and in general. But again, don't try to imitate that. You gotta check. Like what I typically do is when I turn the watering system on, I'm always out in the first few weeks to just see how the water is distributed. Does it make it everywhere where it's supposed to go? But also, does the soil get saturated as I want it? And then I do adjustments, but that is typically only in the first few weeks. And then maybe in the height of summer, I'm having an eye on it again to just make sure that everything gets watered well. Last year we had a really horrible drought over here. It was awful. Like everything else was basically dead except for my garden, which got watered in the early morning hours and at night. We even had a watering ban for under the day, so luckily that didn't affect me here because again, like I was watering early mornings or at night. But for those few weeks when we had really no water coming from from nature, on top of it, I also had at night I think another half hour as well. So I had 2 waterings per day for like a month or so to really make sure that my plants still had a chance to thrive through the drought. But again, every season is different. I have a feeling this year is rather more wet than anything else again, but that is a nice beauty of an irrigation system. You have control over it. You are able to adjust it. You are able to really make it and build it to your needs. I have every container which I have outside hooked up to this system. I have also a faucet in the front, so which has a supply line basically coming all the way under the deck. And then what you always do is you just hook into that supply line where you need water from. So I have hooked it in at one corner of the deck to provide, for example, water here for my little raised bed, and then I have one later hooked into under the deck to serve here my containers. And it's just so nice when you really do not have to think about any watering. One other cool thing is you can use the app also on your phone from just accessing where you have Wi-Fi and just access to a system. It takes your mind off when you go travel, when you go see somewhere and you are somewhere else. It's perfect. And that actually works wonderfully in conjunction with my weather station, because I also do not have to ask or wonder what's the weather is around here. With my weather station, I know exactly how the weather is. Unfortunately, they're not connected, so I am the integration between those two technical devices in the end, but it helps me to decide when I need to add water or when I need to back off of water with the irrigation system. So this was a more nerdy video as well, again, a very detailed one, but I hope it helped you to just consider starting an irrigation system for yourself. Again, it is not as intimidating as it might seem. If you have any questions, I'm more than happy to help with the knowledge I have. I'm not an expert in irrigation systems, definitely not, but I think I did my fair share to really be able to answer some questions. So put the questions in the comments. Yeah, and if you want to see how I start up my irrigation system post-winter in probably 3 to 4 weeks from now, subscribe to the channel, because that will be for sure another video when we see all the little little fountains coming in those areas which have leaks like last year, to fix those ones. That will be definitely another video. So yeah, stick around and feel free to watch another video here. Thank you.